My name is Jesse L. Freeman, Jesse Lee Freeman. I was born in Powell, Mississippi in 1936, October the 4th. My parents were Eva and Willie Freeman. My father, Willie Freeman, was born in Arkansas, and sometime in the 20s, he moved to Mississippi. And at that time, he changed his name to Freeman. Before that, he was named McCurley. My mother, I don't know the exact date of their marriage, but it was somewhere in the 20s. My oldest brother, Willie James Freeman, was born in 1929. My second brother was born in 1931. My third brother was born in 1934, and I was born in 1936. So it's four of us, no sisters. We were raised on my earliest remembrance, we were living on a farm in Powell, Mississippi. It was called the Thompson Farm. My mother and father were sharecroppers on this farm. At the age of 3, I can remember going to the fields to pick cotton, riding on my mother's cotton sack. And as she picked, I picked along and had a little sack that I put my cotton in. As we grew older and started to school, I no longer did the picking that on my mother's sack. I had my own sack when I was 5. I remember starting to school. It was in a church called Thompson Chapel Church. All the kids in the Thompson plantation went to that one school. The older kids would be in the front and the little kids would be in the back. When I became eligible to come into the first grade, I went to a school called Lula High School, but it was really more or less like a junior high. It only went to the 10th grade. I started school there, and for some reason, the books were dilapidated and kind of old. They've been read so much where you didn't get new books every year. The books was passed down to you from year to year. So most of them had pages torn out of them. So what I did on my pre-primer book, I remember this very distinctly. I was 5 years old, and it was my first grade reader. I remembered all the pages, all the words, so I could repeat it verbatim. So when I was asked to read, I just looked at the book and read and said it from my memory. I never looked at the page because some of the pages would be missing in my book. So I always got an A when I went through this way because she thought I was a good reader.
She thought she was a good reader. She didn't... I guess everybody had different pages that were missing and everything.
Everybody had different pages that were missing in that book.
So it looked like sometimes people maybe who could read okay, they were struggling just because the
pages would be missing and they couldn't read it because there was nothing there. The story would have jumps and pieces in it. But mine was always through because I remembered it when the pages were missing from my book. I would look at other people's books that had the pages. So I remembered all the pages. That was just my earliest remembrance of trying to be sure that I understood what was going on in the book. Because if you had missing pages, the stories made no sense.
How many people were in your class?
We had about 20 people in my class when I was a little kid. And as I got into higher grades, like the 3rd, 4th, and 5th grade, the classes got smaller. Because a lot of the kids at that age wasn't allowed to come to school. the plantations they lived on came from there during the harvest time. They would just make them work. It was almost like slavery, because the parents, if they didn't let the kids work, then they would make them move to another farm. They wouldn't keep them. They said, we don't need you no more this year. And then they would have to go looking for another place to live. So rather than do that, most of them would just keep the kids out of school.
So they basically had a quota. Each of the sharecroppers had a quota, and kids were kept out of school to help their family make the family quota.
That's right. The more kids in the family, the bigger sharecrops they could get. However, it was 4 of us, but my mother would not let us stop school. We went to school every day. They talked to her about it. She threatened to move, but they said, okay, you can go ahead and stay, but try to get them to do some work on the weekends. So it was for me and my brothers. We never missed school because of work. And I remember very distinctly going to Lula School. We had a principal named Mr. Pellington. Professor Pellington was the principal, and his wife was the assistant principal. And they were really, real strict on people because they wanted people to succeed. It was kind of strange coming up in a small school like that. And it was all black. They had a white school in Lula. And I always thought that's strange. Sometimes we would go by that white school, and the school was actually painted all white.
Really? It's a white, the building is white?
The building was white, and it had white on the school.
Was there a sign that said that? Or something
like
that?
Yeah, it said Lula White School.
Out on there was a sign that said Lula White School.
There was a sign that said Lula White School.
And they painted it white just in case you couldn't read, I guess.
Well, a lot of the kids couldn't. But no, it was kind of funny. But anyway, this is kind of like my school years. But as far as work, we would, in the fall, we would pick cotton through the week on the ship with my father to help bring in the crops. But on Saturdays, we were allowed to go out and work on other farms to chop cotton, to pick cotton, to make some spending money. And another way that we got spending money for the family was my father. He would always raise what they call a truck patch. He would plant like beans and tomatoes and onions and all kinds of different vegetables. And on the weekend, he would sell those vegetables. He would get a wagon and drive to Lula, which was about 6 miles, and he would hawk the vegetables on the street like a street vendor. And that's how he got extra money. Because when you were a sharecropper, you only got paid once a year. When the crops came in the fall, ever how many bales of cotton you would produce from that farm, it would be, half of it would be yours, and half of it would be the plantation owners. And the plantation owner during the year, he would provide staples like flour and meal and some other stuff that you couldn't really make. And he would put that on a bill, and at the end of the year, after you get your half, he would bring that bill out, and then he would subtract that money from what they've given you. So you wind up with a lot less than what you should have been getting. You never was allowed to see his accountant or know how he was doing his accounting and charging you. So it was like you were more or less working for nothing. And when we was about, I think I was 9 or 10, my father left the Thompson place and rented his own farm. And we worked that for a year. And after that year, he bought a farm. And that's where we lived until I went into the Army in 1954.
So so when he finally did get paid, was that just like a cash transaction? He would go through his ledger and tell you how much you made that year minus everything that you had spent that year, and then did he pay you in cash?
They would pay him in cash, and then we would go to. It was kind of funny in Louisville. They had like a department store that sold everything like clothes, shoes, all that kind of stuff. And then they had a grocery store that sold all kinds of groceries. And they would extend credit to the farmers until the fall harvest came in and they got paid. Then you had to go in and pay them. So by the time you got to paying the plantation owner, the department store owner, and the grocery store owner, it wasn't too much money left to buy clothes. So you had to start the whole cycle over again. The next year, get clothes on credit again because you just paid off that debt. So now you got to start working another year to pay off another debt. So it was just like a cycle ongoing that you would never get out of debt.
So the whole town pretty much and the ecosystem kind of lived off of the backs of the sharecroppers, and essentially that money went someplace else.
Exactly. And I never really understood how we had the grocery store were always owned by a Chinaman.
Really? And even in Louisville? And this was back in 1940s.
In the 1940s. They were there with a grocery store. The black people couldn't do anything, couldn't own a store. It was just this system like it's not much to me. It's not much, but don't seem much better now. You know, it's the rich have and the poor don't.
How big of a town is Lula?
Lula had one red light.
So one red light town.
One red light town. We had one bank, and but one thing they did have, they had a sheriff with a jail.
The sheriff and the city jail.
They had a city jail. And I remember, it's just a funny story. My second brother named Thomas, he was always kind of a free spirit, very smart, but free-spirited guy. And he didn't believe in segregation, so he always fought it. And they tried to arrest him one day. I don't know, about something stupid. And this sheriff tried to arrest him, and Buddy knocked him out.
I mean, he hit him?
He hit him, yes. And that really stirred up a lot of stuff. And they put him in the jail for the day, and they said it was on lynching. But the plantation owner came down and got him out and told him that's one of his workers. You can't lock him up, so he let him go. Buddy was that's what we call my brother Thomas, Buddy. He was very radical.
So where did the nickname Buddy come from?
Well, when Ray was born, that's my oldest brother's name, Willie. They gave him the nickname of Ray. And when Thomas was born, they said, "Now Ray, you got a buddy." So he became Buddy. Ray and Buddy. And when George was born, didn't have no nickname for him, so he was just George, and I was just Jesse, but Ray and Buddy had nicknames.
Where did Ray's nickname come from?
I don't know why they picked Ray. I never knew why he was nicknamed Ray. I probably was told when I was little, but I don't remember.
Because his first name was?
His first name is Willie.
Willie, after your father?
After my father, yeah.
And he was never referred to as Willie Jr.?
No.
It's always right.
He was Willie James. He was Willie James Freeman. My daddy was just Willie Freeman.
And so that's how they distinguish the difference between the two.
Yeah.
If they weren't calling him Ray, it would be Willie James versus just Willie.
Yeah. So, but they really didn't call my father Willie either. His name was Otis. That was his nickname. Everybody called him Uncle Otis. Why he was Uncle Otis, I don't know. But
you don't know where Uncle Otis came from either.
I don't know where the Otis came from. Probably from one of his brothers or cousins or something in Arkansas. I remember when we was kids, my father would about once or twice a year he'll put us in the car. We'll go visit relatives, and most of those relatives was in Arkansas. My Uncle Ed lived in a town called Twist, Arkansas, and we used to drive over there to see him at least once or twice a year. And they would stay back. It's only about 45 miles, but it looked like it took all day back then to get to Twist, Arkansas. And we'll get there and stay about an hour, and my uncle and my dad would get into an argument, and Dad would curse him out, and we would leave. It was, yeah, I can't say the words that Daddy used to leave, but it was, he always used to call him that curse word. That was just one curse word he would use. Black B.
And so to get over there, you crossed the Mississippi River?
Yeah, we had to go across the river on the ferry boat.
So there was no bridge?
No bridge. This was time way before the bridge. We that's another way I used to make some money when I was a kid. There was a lot of pecans going wild and being harvested. So I would gather pecans through the year, get on the ferry boat and sell them in Helena. That was the only place we could sell them. And that would give us spending money.
How did you get to Helena?
On the boat.
Oh, okay, so you go over the ferry.
Yeah, but our house was only about 3 miles from the boat landing. It was a big levee. I know you know what the levee system is. We run about a mile from our house. Then you cross the levee and you go 2 more miles. You got the boat landing. And it ran every two hours. It would cross back and forth. I think it cost like 15 cents something to ride the ferry. But if you took your car across, you had to pay more for the car. Daddy always paid that, so I don't know how much that was. And that was still that system. I left in 1954. When they put the bridge up, I don't know for sure, but I came back in 1958 and they had a bridge. So it was in between those 4 years they built the bridge and the ferry went out of existence. So
you weren't really ever, you didn't grow up very far from the river itself, the Mississippi?
No, about 4 miles.
Did you guys ever have problems with flooding?
Yes. The river would flood over to the levee. And it never crested the levee, but it got to the top of it numerous times. The levee is about 40 feet, 50 feet. But some kind of way in the last few years when they must have built some dams or something so it don't flood, and all that land that from the levee back to the river, they used to couldn't work. They opened that up to farming when they put these dams and stuff in. I don't know exactly where they have the dams. The Corps of Engineers probably could figure out something where they placed these dams so they could open up more land.
Right, that's kind of part of what they do in that region, the combination of the levees and dams. They can decide which areas get flooded and which ones don't, and I imagine they did a little bit more of that when they put the new casinos out there in that area too.
Yeah. because before they wouldn't been able to put anything out there. And that was another surprise to me when I came back in 1958. They had, opened that up to farmland, and that's why I used to go look for my pecans and stuff.
Let's go back to when you were born again, when you were little. You were born in 36?
Yes.
And you said the first thing you remembered was around 39, you were 3 or so, and that's when you started picking cotton.
Yeah.
Hitler invaded Poland in 1939, so that was the beginning of the World War II. Do you remember hearing anything about the war?
The only thing I really remember about the war was we had to have blackouts. I remember the blackout nights. At night we had to put some over our windows, and we couldn't burn the lights at night. Our lights was not electric lights; they was coal oil lamps, but you couldn't have them on at night. And another thing I remember, they was always, if you could find scrap iron, you could always sell it. They were saying that scrap iron was useful for the war effort. They would I guess they reinforced it and made tanks and guns and whatever they do with iron. But that was another maker. If you could find a piece of iron somewhere, you always saved it to try to sell it.
There was no, I guess there's no military base or anything, any kind of presence like that around where you grew up?
No.
I know other people tell stories about, shortages of things, I guess. I guess you didn't have a whole lot. It didn't sound like you had a whole lot to have shortages of during that.
No, it wasn't too much. We kind of grew what we ate. And in the fall, we'll slaughter a hog. And occasionally, Dad would get a young cow, calf, they call them, to slaughter. So I remember we would salt the meat down and put it in a smokehouse. And that was cured so you have ham and stuff for the whole winter, ham and bacon and stuff for the winter. And what we did for vegetables in the fall, the families would get together on Saturdays during the harvest and pick the peas and corn and peaches and pears and all this stuff, and then they would have a canning party. They'll cook all this stuff up, and then they'll put it in these mason jars and pressurize them and seal them up, and then they divide it between the families. And that gave you fresh vegetables throughout the year. So the only thing you had to buy was a mason jar, so once you empty them, you just use them over the next year, over and over. So you had to buy new tops, but you didn't have to buy new jars. That was how we got our vegetables and other substance to go along with the ham and stuff like that. And we did a lot of hunting. We'd get rabbits, and I would get rabbits. I remember once my father was kind of cunning. He would figure out a way to eat anything. So he caught a coon.
A raccoon.
A raccoon. No, and he put it in a cage and he kept it, and he fed it corn and stuff. He said that was supposed to get the wildness out of it. I couldn't eat it. It made me sick. So they called me a big crybaby because I couldn't eat a lot of stuff. I got sick a lot. If I got sick, then I couldn't work, so they didn't want me to get sick.
So how old were you then?
About 7. Because I remember when I was 4, I got a bad finger. I know that I got that hurt when I was 3.5 or 4. I don't remember the exact date, but I remember doing it. I got it caught. They had chairs with spindles in it, but they was closer together, and I could get my fingers in there. And I got it stuck in there, and I couldn't get it out. and I started crying, and somebody tried to get it out, and it broke, and they never took me to the doctor to get it fixed. They just let it heal. So that's the result of me doing that when I was 3. And I also remember the next year, I was 4. That house where I broke this thing, I burned that one down playing with matches.
You burned the house down?
Yeah, I burned 2 houses down. I burned that one down first. And then I burned another house down when I was 8 or 9. I must have been 9, because George was me and my brother George were playing with fireworks in the house. They had these things they called Roman candles. They'd fire and shoot a red ball and a blue ball of fire out. And we were shooting Roman candles at each other inside the house. And George hit me with a Roman candle on the neck. I still have a scar. And I ran out the house, and one of the Roman candles was yet burning inside the house. And it caught the crates on fire and it burned that house down.
This was the house you were living in?
Yeah, we lived in the house that got burned down. That's the second house that we got burned down. And we in the country on that plantation, you had one gravel road that ran through the whole plantation, and everything else was dirt roads. We lived back on a dirt road at that time. After I burnt that second house down, we moved up to the gravel road. And I was so glad, because when it rained, you had to take your car out to the gravel road so you could go to school. And you had to walk through the mud and stuff to get up there. It was just terrible. So when we moved to the gravel road, we didn't have to do that. The car was just there.
So, well, you were probably young at the time, but your house burned down. I mean, was this like community houses, or somebody build houses for all the sharecroppers? Or
yeah, if you lived on a sharecropper on the farm, they furnished your house.
So they provide a house for you as part of it.
Yeah.
And so the house burned down. They just kind of
give you another house.
Give you another house. Didn't you get a whooping for that?
George got a whooping for shooting me with the fire.
So he got in trouble and you didn't?
It was his fault.
It was his fault.
I always blame my brother on everything. It was both our fault.
So you were closest with George?
Yeah. Later, buddy, but George was closer my age. But after we got older, and he started what we call courting, liking girls, then we kind of grew apart. He grew closer to my cousin called AC. His name is Henry C. Mosley. Just call him AC. But he was George's age, so they started hanging out together when they got to be teenagers, 15 and stuff like that. So I was mostly hanging out by myself, going to school and kind of timid. But I was a straight A student, didn't miss school.
When you traveled, you said your dad would take you every once in a while to see his family in Arkansas. When you were younger, was that the furthest you'd ever been?
No. One time he took me to see my Aunt Clea in Oklahoma.
Wow, that had to be a really long trip.
It was a beautiful trip. And I wasn't supposed to go. We took him to the train station, and he got on the train, and I started crying, and I wanted to go, so he put me on the train and got me a ticket and took me with him. I didn't have any clothes or anything. I wasn't supposed to be going. So when we got to Oklahoma, he had to take me out and buy me some clothes. And that was a beautiful trip. My Aunt Cleese, they lived on a ranch. They had wild horses and tame horses, and cows, and it was just beautiful. And I still have a lot of relatives live in Oklahoma City and around in that area, Spencer, Oklahoma City, in that area. but we kind of lost contact. I tried to keep in contact with them, but it don't seem like they were that interested in keeping contact, so we kind of lost it. The last I heard from her was when Aunt Clee died. My wife and I drove out to her funeral, and after that, I really haven't heard from any of them.
How far is that, or do you know how far that is that from Tulsa?
Tulsa and Oklahoma City it's not too far apart, because Aunt Clee had two sons, and one of them lived in Tulsa, and one of them lived in St. Louis. Actually, St. Louis was the farthest I went when I was young, because I went to stay with Uncle George for 2 weeks in St. Louis. I remember I must have been, how old was I when I went there? I had to be 11 to 12.
11 or 12 years old?
Yeah, because I can remember he was, I guess I thought he was a big wheel, but I understand he was like a gangster.
Really?
Yeah, he had golf clubs and wore suits every day, and he got killed, but nobody know how he got killed or why he got killed. So I imagine he must have been some kind of gangster or something. He had lived in a big fancy house and stuff. I thought it was pretty cool, but what do a kid know?
Yeah, especially somebody dressed up in big house and everything.
And we know he didn't have the education for it, so. And then that was Uncle George.
So he would have been another one of your father's?
But nephew.
Your nephew?
Yeah, this was my Aunt Clee's kids. And it was always strange. Dad never set a relationship. We had cousins in Arkansas that we would go visit, and we, spend the night, eat with them and stuff, but I never knew their name. And when Daddy died in '83, some of them came to the funeral at the church in Mississippi. They came and they sat outside the church. They never came in. And I went out and talked to them, but I couldn't get them to give me the address and anything. So I lost contact with them too. The only one now that I really have contact with is my cousin that lives in Detroit on my father's side of the family, Ed Wallace. And at the time when I was coming up, I knew I was his cousin, but I didn't know why I was his cousin. Daddy never talked about family at all. He would take us to see him, but he wouldn't talk about it.
I think you're going to be interested to know that I think we might be able to find out a little bit more about that. Working with, when I was out visiting with my cousin Anthony, he's told me some other different stories that he's sure that you don't know.
Yeah, because my brother Ray moved out to California, and he always talked about Marcellus and some other family members that was on Daddy's side of the family. And there's a lot of them out there in California. I saw them when Ray died, but I don't really know who they are or how they was entwined in the family.
Right. I think I met a few on that side of the family when I was out there that I never knew existed. So it was pretty interesting. So as we go through the oral history series, I'm going to do a little bit more investigation on that side as well, talk with Anthony, and try to talk with some of those other folks. Some of the things that Anthony was telling me was that your dad didn't only just live in Arkansas, he lived in the Oklahoma area for a while.
See, I didn't know that. I knew the story of him living in Arkansas and coming to Mississippi, changing his name to Freeman. But that's all I knew about that.
Yeah, and I don't remember the whole story, and we're going to go back and try to get a little bit more detail about it. But apparently, there are a couple of reasons why he may have changed his name. and it had to do with some of the things that happened when he was in Oklahoma.
Okay, I always thought it was something that happened in Arkansas.
Yeah.
But that's saying it makes sense because that's where Aunt Cleveland was, in Oklahoma. I never understood why she was way out in Oklahoma. But because of him not talking about it so much, I guess I got to know my mother's side of the family better than I did my father's side of the family. So I knew all of them, Aunt Cora, Aunt Frances, Aunt Mary, Uncle Jim, Uncle Charlie. You know, they was like second nature with me. I knew all that family. Uncle Jim was my mother's oldest brother. He got killed in a car accident in 1948 or 49, somewhere in that area. And Uncle Jim, I never forget. He went to the army, and he came back from the army. He had on this beautiful khaki uniform, and he looked so sharp and handsome in that uniform. That's why I wanted to go in the army.
Yeah, that's what inspired you to go in the Army?
Yes, one of the things. Looking at him coming home from the war.